Good evening. Welcome to our program. My name is Don Cooney. I'm a city commissioner, and I'm also an associate professor in the School of Social Work at Western Michigan University. And my guest tonight is Dr. Rudy Siebert, who is a professor of religion at Western Michigan University. And he has just returned from Dubrovnik, where he has gone for 23 years every summer. And he's right there on the edge of the war that's going on in Kosovo. So our program tonight is going to focus on that war. And the title that we've chosen is The War Against Yugoslavia. Is Peace Possible? Dr. Siebert, great to be with you again.
Thank you.
Well, let's start off by sort of a report from the front. What did you see? What's going on over there?
Well, in April, I went to Europe, and first I gave a talk in Rostock, in the eastern part of Germany, and I spoke on the synagogue, the church, and after Auschwitz. And in the audience, then, of course, people wanted to know about this war down there, and I found out that in Eastern Germany, a majority of people were really against that war. But at least one person represented the NATO position, and there was some kind of a struggle in the audience about this. And from there, then, I flew down to Dubrovnik here in the Adriatic Sea, the Dubrovnik. And there I had this course, the 23rd International Course on the Future of Religion. And this time it was then more specifically on transcendence without counter-movement. And we took into consideration, of course, people in Croatia and Montenegro and so on, who were under bombardment and would say their prayers, and then there would be no counter-movement, no help from
no response
above. Yeah, the same thing like we had in Auschwitz. You know, people were praying Adonai, Adonai, in their extreme distress, and nothing would come. So, or some people think there is something coming. So that was our conference about scholars, you know, international scholars from everywhere. Some did not come because they were afraid of the bombardment. And indeed, they're from Italy there, as well as from the carrier Roosevelt and other carriers. The airplanes came day and night and flew over Dubrovnik. When we came from Zagreb and flew down to Split and Dubrovnik, we had to fly very low and very slowly and so on, because over 4,000 meters was all reserved for the NATO planes. And of course, the MX rockets fly much lower than 4,000, so we were not entirely without fear. And so we landed there, and particularly most of the week was then moonlight, so, and you could hear the planes, you know, going to Montenegro. Then you could hear the detonations there. Villages were bombed, roads and so on, and so there was a lot of noise all the time, particularly during the night. So that was the scenery in which we then did our course.
And what was the reaction of the people at the conference to what was going on?
I would say in the conference, a majority was for the NATO. And what motivated them was, you know, all the reports about atrocities of the Milosevic government in Kosovo there. And so, you know, we split up in a certain sense between a position which is called decisionism, where in a certain emergency situation, you sometimes have to do wrong things, and heads of state even have to commit crimes in order to prevent greater crimes and so on. And then a certain position which is called normativism, where you measure people in terms of their own codes, in terms of their own constitution, in terms of the Charter of the United Nations, in terms of Geneva Convention, and so on. And so some of us took this normativistic position and therefore thought that the NATO violated a lot of these laws. And the others took this decisionist type of a position and thought that the atrocities there had to be met, you know, with action, even if this action was sometimes criminal in itself.
So there was a split among the groups, and there were two different ways of coming to a decision. Coming to a decision. Okay. How about your own view? I mean, when you and I have talked about this issue, and you impressed me with the idea about how important a historical perspective is to get the context for what's going on here. Could you give a little bit of that, please?
Yeah. I mean, as soon as another nation or so is declared to be the enemy or so, and you have suddenly a certain tension between friends and enemies. It becomes very hard then, you know, to be rational and so on. So you always should be with your friends, of course, and if you try to break through the in-group, out-group of friends and enemy, you know, you get in trouble somehow. And you would like to be with your friends, but, you know, sometimes one has to look through the eyes of the other too. And that is the difficult thing. So, and I think the best way to overcome the eclipse of reason, which happens in every war, I mean, the first casualty is the truth in every war. And I was, during the whole Civil War, I went there to Croatia, and I was sitting in the basement in Dubrovnik when the Serbs bombarded it and so on. So it was really so that the truth was on both sides the first casualty. So, but to get out of this eclipse of reason, I would say one way is at least that one sees the actions and reactions which finally have led, you know, to this day. I mean, to this morning. Yesterday, we bombed the city of Sis in southern Serbia down there. With cluster bombs, which are forbidden by the Geneva Convention. They spread all over the place and cut people like razor blades and so on. And so the cluster bombs fell into areas of non-combatants and on a marketplace of Sis, and the people were laying around with their groceries, you know, all around them. And they also fell into a hospital and cut people to pieces in the hospital and so on. So at this moment, but the question is, you know, how did we get there and so on? And of course you can go far back, and these people in these territories, they go far back. I mean, they have a memory which is unbelievable and which is alive. So one could go back to the 14th century when there in Kosovo the Turks slaughtered the Serbs on the so-called, the Germans call that the Amselfeld. Amsel is a blackbird, so they call it the Valley of the Blackbird, or the valley where we lost our liberty and so on. So this is all sacred ground and so on. But,
1389, right?
1389. Yeah, that was a long time ago.
Whoa!
And, but I mean, one can, if we start, you know, in our century or so, then of course the last time that Belgrade up there was bombed by the by Hitler's Air Force. And I still remember a professor of mine of scholastic philosophy who was at that time a reporter of the German propaganda ministry, and I still hear his voice through the radio, this heroic voice, "Our Air Force has bombed Belgrade," and so nothing's left of it. And so this is always still ringing in my ear. By the way, in the 70s or so, I was sitting in Zagreb up there, which is the capital of Croatia, with 10 priests. And there was one priest who had a brain operation. And while we were eating, he was always falling asleep. But then he woke up again and would say, "And what we really need is a civilization of love," which was a quotation from a letter, encyclical letter of John the 23rd. And then he fell asleep again. No matter wherever we were, he came up again and said, "What we need is really a civilization of love." But then he woke up once and he said something else. He said, "You know, when Hitler bombed Belgrade, he did not hit the residence of the king." And then he fell asleep again. But it was the day on which we bombed Gaddafi's residence and his daughter was killed in this process. What he really wanted to say was, you American guys, you are worse than Hitler was, because he at least respected the symbol of sovereignty, which you don't do anymore. You have become more barbarous. But nevertheless, he fell asleep again, and the next time he came up, what we need is a civilization of love and so on. So, so this you know, is of course the whole background, this bombardment. And then, of course, Hitler tried to conquer this whole territory, and he never was in control of it. So the Italians occupied Albania, they are there again now, and Hitler went to Kosovo too, and so on. And it is the territory, the geography, which made it impossible to control it. So therefore, Tito...
Before you do that, tell us about the geography. What made it so difficult for
the Kosovo territory? You know, we have already one helicopter, you know, crashed there in Macedonia down there, because it ran against something. Because it is very uneven, very mountainous all over the place, and there are a lot of caves. You can disappear. And so for a partisan army, you know, it is ideal because you go into the mountains, then you come out, you blow up a train, you go back. Hitler tried to control this by killing innumerable people in the villages. Every German who was killed, 10 people in the villages were killed. He killed whole high schools, 500 high schools with the teachers, all shooting them down in the marketplace in order to stop this, but he could never stop it. Tito remained in control, and that is why since 3 or 4 years the Pentagon refuses to put ground forces in there to march in, because the casualties would be enormous and so on. As a matter of fact, the KLA, the Kosovo Liberation Army, has enormous casualties at this moment on the border of Albania and in the next mountains there, where they try to fight against the Serbian army, and the casualties are enormous. So,
well, now, I just want to,
yeah.
I think that's a point that we don't hear anything about. I mean, there's
Yeah.
a lot of talk about putting ground troops in there, but
Yeah.
what you're saying that even with the German army that was so skilled, so highly trained, so
Right,
well equipped,
exactly,
they
yeah.
were not able to
No.
control that region.
Right, yeah.
And so it would be
Yeah.
quite a risk and
yeah.
quite a
And therefore we
cost.
have decided to do it by air, you know, how far that goes and so on. But nevertheless, after Tito then took over the territory, he was able, because of his great prestige, having won against Hitler, standing up against Stalin. That's what they quote all the time. They say, you cannot bomb us because we stood up against Stalin and so on. You cannot do anything to us neither, whatever you do and so on. So nevertheless, that was then after Tito then, who balanced out, because of his prestige also among the non-aligned and so on, he could balance the 6 republics and these ethnic groups and so on. So he gave everybody something. And the Kosovo people, he gave autonomy. So when we asked 6, 7 weeks ago, you know, we want to give autonomy to Kosovo, we wanted to give back to them the autonomy which Tito had given them. It was a communistic autonomy which we wanted to give them. But under Milosevic then, the independent, not independent, but the autonomous province of Kosovo then was totally in the hands of Albanians. And there was only a minority of 10 to 20% Serbs. The Belgrade government had the impression, let me put this, they had the impression, that the minority, the Serbian minority in Kosovo, was not treated rightly. And therefore, Milosevic took the autonomy away. As soon as he had taken the autonomy away, the Kosovians organized a liberation movement, which is called today the KLA. The CIA registered this liberation front first as a terrorist organization. But then in the process, the CIA got the idea that this KLA could very well destabilize the last socialistic country on the, not only the Balkan, but in all of Eastern Europe. And so they, the CIA, since no money came from the Senate or from the House, from Congress, therefore they used drug money and they used prostitution money and put them all into beautiful uniforms and also beautiful new weapons and so on. And you could see them on television sometimes marching around. So nobody can say, you know, we don't know about them, because you could see them.
So we were financing this.
We were financing
we were
this.
supporting that army.
And they were now, of course, challenging not only the police force in Kosovo, the Serbian police force, or the Yugoslav police force, but also the army and so on. So then an offensive was started from up there, which was going on already before we met in Paris in order to get some kind of a treaty. So that is true, you know, as far as our position is concerned. So, but what he wanted to do was to mop up this liberation front. And wherever there were battles between the Yugoslav army, the Yugoslav police, and the Yugoslav paramilitary forces, with something like the Green Beret people, very tough units, they then pushed this liberation front back south. And wherever there were battles, of course, the people had to run away. And so they were refugees before the NATO struck. That is true. About 300,000 is possible. So they went then from their villages into the mountains and waited until that battle was over. When the battle had moved further to the south, they went back again. Now, when
Excuse me, could I just get that straight? Now, let me make sure I'm clear on that. What you're saying is then that when the Serbian army came down there were like 3 different parts in the Serbian army,
Yes.
right? There was the regular army, there was the police
force, yes.
and then there was
paramilitary one.
Paramilitary
Yeah, which
groups.
are very tough people. And I think that Milosevic has even admitted that these paramilitary forces did do bad things.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you're saying that when they would fight with the KLA, then people would pull out of the villages, but that then they would return.
They would return, yes.
The refugees did not go
They
out
never
of the
went
borders.
to Albania or Macedonia.
Okay.
So the first pressure into Macedonia and Albania came with the first day of the bombardment.
Okay.
Because now suddenly there was not only that conflict between the Yugoslav army and the KLA, but now, as the KLA people say, they suddenly had air support. That means the KLA considers the NATO, and particularly our 900 bombers, to be their air support. And now, of course, the landscape was, you know, glittered with bombs all over the place, and the streets and the trains and so on were all bombed. And then started this spilling over of this, and the struggle became more intense now. That means if we wanted to stop ethnic cleansing, it got worse now. But it was not ethnic cleansing in the specific sense. It was a cleaning up of this insurrectionist army, which we had supported against our own constitution, because we are not allowed to support insurrectionist armies in other sovereign countries. And that was just one, you know, which the normativists will, of course, emphasize, you know, that we are in conflict with our own law, which then the decisionists would say, but this is necessary because of this emergency situation.
But some of the people that became refugees were chased out by the Serbian army, right? Weren't
they? It seems chased out. Now, you know, what we say all the time, when we say this on CNN or whatever, we say that we have no independent verification. So therefore, one has to be careful. They could pull that back, you know, someday after it has done its psychological work already. There is, of course, some kind of, you know, individual refugees have been asked, and I think that's where we get our news from. But one has to be careful. Once refugees said, you know, that 40 men had been shot in the marketplace, and that all the people who had been in Paris, you know, for the negotiating, had all been killed, and then 3 days later they appeared in Belgrade. And then we said the main leader, you know, is house arrest in Belgrade, but 3 days ago he came with his whole family and was in Rome now. And then we said, well, he's a pacifist, and the KLA wants to fight, and therefore he does not represent anybody, and so on. So there is a lot of confusion in all this, and we have to be very careful. I mean, it may very well be true, you know, but I mean, we want to be sure before, even about the enemy, one should be careful if we say something about the enemy that it is really true, particularly the enemy, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the bombing really made what was an internal refugee problem a refugee problem which led people out of the country, and then it became an international refugee problem.
Now, we were aware, you know, of this scenario because we have it in Central America. People were always afraid that these socialistic states like Nicaragua or maybe part of El Salvador and so on, that they would suddenly unleash, you know, masses of refugees which would get into California and into New Mexico and so on, and then would create great problems, you know. Exactly that scenario for which we had camps down there to take care of it, that has happened here. And now, you know, one hears people saying the police came into our house and said, you know, go to Bill Clinton, you know, go to the NATO, and so on and so on. Then they go from their house to the railroad station. I mean, that sense is all normal, you know, go to the railroad station, and or they take their tractor and go away. So it is not entirely clear to me, you know, because some stay all the time. So, but some say, if we don't go, they will shoot us. So it's a very confused type of a picture. And at the moment, I think it is hard to clarify the whole thing, you know.
There are accusations of burning of villages.
Yeah.
There are accusations of mass rapes. And what's your judgment on that?
Yeah, well, it is a repetition of the stories which we had in Bosnia-Herzegovina. So in Bosnia-Herzegovina, it was said that the Serbs were raping the Islamic women in order to change the ethnic or the racial constitution. But they're all Slavs. So therefore, there's nothing to change, you see. They're, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, when the Turks came up there, they converted, you know, more or less lovingly, converted a lot of Slavic people to the Islamic faith and so on. So it has something to do with culture. It has nothing to do with biology, and therefore, you know, one has to be careful about these stories too. That armies which are not very well disciplined then do these things, particularly in battle, that is very well known. And if you have very disciplined armies like the German army, they may not do that, but they may kill more. So one has to be, you know, these are very horrible things which belong to our animal history, unfortunately. And, but one has to look into it, you know, and see how true that all is. So, and if Milosevic himself admits, you know, that the paramilitary things got out of control and did, you know, bad things, then I would believe that.
Right, right, and he has said that.
Yeah, he has said that, exactly, yeah.
Okay, so what's your how's this war going now? I mean, is it chaotic, or is it coming in?
It depends how you measure it, you know. The war goals in the last 6 weeks, you know, have changed continually. So the means are intensified and the goals change. People may not even remember anymore what it was about. Yeah. I mean, originally it was about to force Milosevic to sign the treaty in the suburb of Paris somewhere, which I can never keep in mind. Yeah, very good. Thank you for this. Yeah. And first of all, if that had been successful, a contract which you are forced to accept is not morally or legally binding. We have seen this, you know, in Iraq or so. If you are forced into a marriage, you know, the contract is invalid. And so, you know, it does not make any sense. You have to put always your weapons behind it, because the guy has no moral obligation to keep it, because it was done under duress. And so there's a... but the treaty which was there, you know, sometimes we still hold on to it and say, well, you know, we want to have Serbia or Kosovo rather autonomous. So we want to go back to the Tito position. But we don't want to go forward to the KLA position, which means independence, and means that the southern part of Kosovo, together with the southern part of Macedonia, will join in some form or the other of a federation, Albania, and create the greater Kosovo. Instead of the greater Serbia, we suddenly have a greater Albania, and the European community will never support this, because they do not want to have an Islamic state on European territory. They never, since the 14th century, they wanted that. They drove the Turks back from Vienna up there all the way, and they, you know, are frightened of this possibility. They don't want to have a Gaddafi sitting there, or Iraqians, or Iranians, or Shiites, or whatever. That is why they made this arrangement in Bosnia-Herzegovina to bring the Croats and the Muslims together in order to prevent a Muslim state. So they will allow for autonomy down there, but they will never allow for having a Muslim state so big and so close to the back door of their civilization there.
So the strategy at this point seems to be keep the bombing going, keep the bombing going. Yeah. Last night, Congress voted to give President Clinton more than $13 billion. He only asked for $6 billion, but he asked for that money to continue the war possibly until the end of September. What is your judgment? Should this bombing continue?
These are not the only costs of this bombing.
Right.
It has galvanized, you know, even Montenegro partially, and also, of course, the Serbs in Kosovo and in Serbia in terms of their Slavic origin, and in terms also of their orthodoxy. You know, the Patriarch of Belgrade, of course, you know, talked in the name of the victims. He wanted to have his Orthodox Easter free from bombing. It didn't happen. The Patriarch of the West, the Pope in Rome, wanted to have the same thing. And the Patriarch of Athens thought we were diabolical. Also, the Pope said it was a diabolical war and so on. But they are not listened to. You see, we have a very Machiavellian attitude toward religion. We functionalize it, and when we can use it, it's okay. If it becomes dysfunctional, you know, we just shut it up and so on. So nobody listened to them, which is a very, very sad affair. But this, the main, it's not even the money thing, you know, that every rocket which comes here from the Roosevelt up there and flies in there is $1 million, you know. So, but it is beyond that also the other costs, the political costs, because it galvanizes the whole Eastern Europe. The penetration of the civil society has stopped because of a certain mafia capitalism of moving in, making profits, and moving out again. So it is stuck anyway in Kiev, where I was, and everywhere else. Now this, of course, will galvanize, all the Slavic brothers and all the Orthodox brothers, believing or not believing, And this will be very costly in the next election. They will have fall elections. And it will galvanize, there's large contingency of communists in all these states left, and also on the other side, the nationalists, which are new. And sometimes they make common cause. And if they make common cause, no parliament up there is operative any longer.
So you see this as a real blow to democracy in that section of the world.
Because if you listen to Gorbachev, for instance, he said, I have been cheated, deeply disappointed about this. It seems, as if suddenly the European Union, including ourselves, were wolves in sheepskin, and suddenly the sheepskin has fallen and they see the wolf now, and so on. So it is, if our goal was to remove the last socialistic resistance there, it may very well be that the war was not so far not successful.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So we're going to run short of time here, but I want to ask you, Rudy. You're saying bombing is not the answer. That the bombing is not helpful. It's not doing what we need to do.
It has not succeeded.
It has not succeeded, and there's not much prospects that it will.
It will not.
So where do we go? What should happen?
Well,
here?
I would say that one should stop the bombing, should take seriously the reorganization plans of Russia, Greece, Italy, Germany, and establish, Yugoslavia was was developed, under the first New World Order, Wilson, then re-established, under Hitler, and it failed, the Second World Order. Now it's the Third World Order, and in this, of Helsinki. And in terms of this New World Order, this whole territory has to be ordered in a new way. And that means that Kosovo can become autonomous. There is another similar province a little bit further on. Both of them can become autonomous inside of Serbia, and Serbia inside of the new Yugoslavia. It is possible that also reorganization must take place, that in Bosnia-Herzegovina the Serbian parts will go to Serbia, the Croatian Islamic parts will go to Croatia, and then all of them have to conclude some kind of an economic contract in order to be eligible for membership in the European Union.
Okay.
And I think that would be some kind of a, plan, which would be acceptable.
Right. You see the answer as diplomatic and economic negotiations.
Yeah. Everybody can bomb,
Right.
But diplomacy needs brain,
Yeah.
And if you think of Kissinger's position, he has warned against it. He said there are other possibilities. Now he says, now we have to win. It sounds to me, like Vietnam, we have lost already 40,000, therefore we cannot stop.
Oh, yeah.
And then we added 15,000 to it, and
That's
60,000 later on who committed suicide when they were at home. So I don't think it is a rational approach. Milosevic said he would take the thing, he would look at the thing, the Brussels arrangement of the 8 industrial nations 2 days ago, if they stop the bombing. If they don't stop the bombing, we'll not even look at it.
Right, right, right.
I don't think bombing is the answer to it.
It's interesting because I think that there has been, within the peace movement in the United States, there's been a reluctance to get involved in this because we hear about Milosevic, we hear about these terrible crimes, and who could ever not want to stop that? Especially after the Holocaust, we never want to see anything like that happen again. But what you're telling us is that that a lot of this is propaganda, a lot of this is unconfirmed. There are no question that there are terrible human rights violations here, but the way to stop those human rights violations is not through the bombing.
And let me say, even if it was all true what the NATO says about atrocities and so on, it's always enemy and friend. The friends, make mistakes and have collateral damage, and the others commit atrocities and so on. But even if the whole atrocity thing was true, as a normativist, I would still say that one should not commit crimes because others have committed crimes, because you undermine your own moral authority, which is necessary for the reorganization of this territory.
So that's no solution.
No.
The bombing is no solution.
On a dead-end street.
Right.
Apoetical.
Yeah.
Aporia. Dead end.
I would just add that here in Kalamazoo, members of people who are very concerned about this, people of conscience, are going to start a peace vigil every Monday afternoon at 4:30 for an hour outside the federal building on Michigan Avenue. And the message is, stop the bombing, seek a diplomatic solution, look for alternatives. Because I think that people in the peace movement want to align themselves with people who are oppressed. But they're saying the most effective line with those people is not through bombing. Yeah. It's through these other kinds of things. Right. It distresses me very much, too, that we look on force and militarism as a solution to the problem, especially in the light of what happened here a couple weeks ago in Littleton, where we see young people picking up guns, using dynamite, violence as a solution to the problems. And here I think back at Dr. King in the Vietnam War saying, you tell me to keep people nonviolent, and then you go out and look at violence as a solution.
And there is this danger, of relapse into a fascist attitude. The two students who killed the others, had obviously fascist tendencies.
Right.
The black man who was pulled to death there and down, these people said Sieg Heil in the end and so on. So the fascism I thought it was a German thing, but unfortunately I think everybody can fall into this horrible temptation, and one has to resist it in the schoolyard, and I think one has to resist it on the highest level of decision-making.
The international level, yeah. Well, I thank you so much, Dr. Siebert, for being with us today. It's a wonderful discourse that you've given us, and I think it's so timely with what's going on, and I think it